Episode number 12. Today on the Artist of Motion podcast, we feature a man who legitimately holds rank in more styles than I have time to list. How can one person earn so many accolades and studies? Well, it's easy when you're Joe Rebelo. He's got a 162 IQ, a photoeidetic memory, and his life is the martial arts. So instead of me telling you his story, let's just get to hearing from Joe himself. Here we go. Welcome everybody to this edition of the Artists of Motion podcast. Today my guest is Kenpo Joe Rebelo. He's back for our second attempt at getting this one done after some technological difficulties the first go-round. He is the owner and head instructor of Rebelo's Kenpo Karate in New Bedford, Massachusetts. He's the host of Martial Arts Today TV, who has featured more guests than we have time to cover today. He possesses a photographic memory and has been training in martial arts for over 40 years, and he's recognized in multiple lineages of martial arts with advanced black belt degrees. He's also a member of several martial arts Hall of Fames. Joe has one of the largest collections of martial arts patches going today, and an extensive video and print library on top of that. He is known in the Kenpo community as a martial historian, and we're really glad to have him back on the show today. How you doing, Joe?
Doing good. Thank you for inviting me to the show.
I'm glad we can reconvene here. We had the technical difficulties on the first go-round, so we got it squared away, and we're ready to do this.
No problem whatsoever. More than happy to help.
I really do appreciate it. So let's do the curriculum vitae piece first. So let's give us your background. Where'd you start? What'd you train in? Where you at today? All that fun stuff.
Sure. I started almost 50 years ago. It's going to be 50 years actually this October. I was 7 years old, and I was doing father-son horseplay with my dad, and he hit me with a karate chop and dropped me. And instead of crying, I looked up at him and said, "What was that?" He goes, "That's karate." I'm like, "What's karate?" He then proceeded to explain a little bit what karate was all about, and he took two books off his shelf, and he passed them along to me. One was a book by Bruce Tegner, and the other one was the world-famous Karate, The Art of Empty Hand Fighting by Nishiyama and Brown with the wonderful tatami embroidered cover. And he has been studying with a gentleman by the name of Dave Schuster. And Dave Schuster was a gentleman who had started the studying Masayama's Kyokushinkai system and had a Kyokushinkai dojo on Dartmouth Street, New Bedford, Mass. Way back when, no one was teaching kids, no one was teaching women. You know, it was a very, very select group. So my father would give me little tricks of the trade in relationship, and punches and kicks, and we would do little things here and there. Then fast forward, and I should mention, when I was born grossly pigeon-toed, and I couldn't run and play with the other kids as easily. Both my feet literally pointed at 90-degree angles. I was very familiar. You know, I could see Forrest Gump in those braces, and I was like, I could relate. I was actually had cast when I was a small baby to try to straighten my feet out. But the martial arts really helped me with that. Really specifically when I started in the commercial martial arts, I was at St. Anthony's junior high school or elementary school. It was 7th and 8th grade. And I met a gentleman by the name of Eric Chevalier. And Eric was studying at one of the original United Studios of Self-Defenses that was created by Fred Villari back in the 1970s. This is 1975. And that summer, after I met with Eric and he gave me stories about his martial arts training, they had a special in the Standard Times, which is a local newspaper, for 3 months of instruction, free uniform, free patch, free bag to carry your stuff for a whopping $99. And my mother, who was a stitcher at the time, I convinced her to have me go to the school. And there I met my first official karate instructor commercially, which was a gentleman by the name of Fred E. Hosmer. And he normally has referred to him as Ed. So it's ironic that two of the most important people in my martial arts career were both named Ed.
I'm guessing the second was Ed Parker.
Hey, you bet. Oh, yeah, no doubt about it. You know, I always say when people say, well, what was your instructor like? I said he had the flexibility of Jean-Claude Van Damme. He had the physique of Bruce Lee. He had the tan of George Hamilton. He had the hair. He had the hair like Robert Redford. I mean, the guy was a good-looking guy. It was funny because we had a local. It's located in Fairhaven. We used to have high school girls come by and look in the window just to watch Ed work out. But he was an incredible martial arts instructor, and he was a person at the time. Even though United Studios, Fred Valari's format and what later would become the Shaolin Kenpo system. Way back then, it was Kenpo Karate with an N. And I remember we used to bow to Professor Chow, and there was a picture of Professor Chow. Years later, I would learn his actually was autographed to Nick Serio. And we would bow to flag, bow to Professor Chow, kneel and meditate, front position, and that's how I started. And we got it all the way up to blue belt, and then Ed left for various reasons and whatnot, and we had a series of instructors come in. But I was so ingrained with training with him. He encouraged me to read different martial arts magazines, and because of my memory, I didn't just read them, I memorized them. So I had this catalog of martial arts information, arts I had never studied, as I was studying Kenpo. As a small child, I also remembered the importance of keeping track of things. So because of that, you mentioned about the photographic memory. I found out in my high school years later on, I had a 162 IQ, which was genius level at that time. And even back then, I knew even back then, I knew the importance of taking notes. So I would pull out my little Flair magic markers, and I'd take my little notebook and put my notebook paper, and I would write technique number 1, and I would try to write it as best I could in my 12-year-old capabilities. And it was really funny because fast forward almost 20 years later, there was a gentleman there at the studio who basically he was a real jock. In fact, he was being scouts for the National Baseball League. We're looking at him to put him on one of the teams, etc. And he laughed at me. He thought that me writing these notes was funny, and he made fun of me about it. Well, fast forward over 20 years later, we were at his studio in Acushnet, and we were going over some of that material, and he was like, "Hey, I remember that technique." I keep going through. "Hey, I forgot that technique. Wow, I forgot it." Going, "Wow, I don't even. Wow, what are you doing?" I'm saying, I'm going over my notes. Remember the ones that you made fun of me for?
Nice.
Wow. And I was like, "Wow, can I get a copy of them?" "No, you made fun of me."
Nice.
I eventually gave a copy of them. But, it was like, I was like, well, it's not my fault. You didn't, But I mean, so I was studying at Hosmer, and like I said, he had left him when I was a blue belt, and I started looking around at different martial arts schools. I went to go train in Taekwondo, Tang Soo Do. Also, another inspiration for me locally was a gentleman, Jack Leonardo, who was the person who brought Aikido to New Bedford area. He originally had studied originally through books. He owned a local music store, and he used to teach accordion lessons, and then he got involved in York barbells and started at 40 years of age he could bench over 300, which was like back then astronomical. He also sold bear archery, but then he was reading Iron Man magazine, and which he had gotten because obviously he was involved in bodybuilding and weightlifting, and read an article on Aikido. And the other martial art that he had read about was Ed Parker's Kenpo Karate. For those of you who don't know, there are articles on Mr. Parker's system on old issues of Iron Man magazine. So he had studied Aikido, and he was a great inspiration to me as well. He taught me not only about the physicality, but also the mentality and the philosophy behind martial arts. And he really was a living epitome of what a master should be. So I was still bouncing around back and forth. And I had seen a small ad in the local newspaper. Private Kung Fu students requested, no experience necessary. And I went to this location on a place called Hick Street, which is in a rather seedy neighborhood. There was a motorcycle gang headquarters up the street from it. And I met a gentleman by the name of Leo Lacert. And Leo and another gentleman, Chris Vieira, were teaching this hybrid system of Kung Fu, Chung Lum Kung Fu. And Chris Vieira had trained with Ron Champlain, which some people may know as Master Chi. And was working with them in this hybrid system of Kung Fu. And while all this was going on at the same time, I was going to European Health Spa. And I met a gentleman by the name of John Gabriel. And John Gabriel had returned from the Air Force and stationed in Taiwan, and he learned Taekwondo and Taekwondo. Now, with most people, Taekwondo is the Taiwanese pronunciation of Taekwondo, but the representative for Taiwan for Taekwondo was the son of a Chinese diplomat who was the envoy to Korea. And he had studied Korean calligraphy with Dan Il, who was the Taekyon instructor for General Che, or some people pronounce it General Choi, Choi Hong-hee. So he and Choi studied Taekyon with this calligrapher together because his father, who was a Mandarin and also was a diplomat and an envoy to the ambassador to Korea from China, wanted his son to be immersed in the Korean culture, and he had also married a Korean woman. So this is a combination of Taekwondo and 8 Kung Fu styles, and it's a lot different from conventional traditional Taekwondo. So I'm learning that. I'm studying this Kung Fu system. I'm studying Taekwondo, and then I find out that there's a Kung Fu club over at SMU, not Southern Methodist, but Southeastern Massachusetts University, which would later become UMass Dartmouth. So I go to meet the instructor, and he's the 8th chosen disciple from this gentleman, Jason Zhou. For those of you who might have a complete guide to Kung Fu styles, you'll see several pictures of Sifu Zhou depicted showing the northern styles all throughout that book from Unique Publications. So student Ed Jada, I went to go study with him, and he said, "Oh, do you study in the martial arts?" "Oh, yeah, I study Kenpo." "Well, then I can't teach you." I was like, "What do you mean you can't teach me?" It's like, "Well, my instructor says you'll poison the art." And I was like, with all due respect, I expect hearing that from a Chinese gentleman, not the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Caucasian, you know. So at first he wouldn't teach me, and I kept showing up to classes. And like the 3rd or 4th class, I was the only person there. None of his other students showed up. And he was like, "You really want to do this?" I said, "Yeah, I take 2 buses and go here for an hour just to sit on the chair." "Yeah, I do." So I said, "Okay, I'll teach you." So that was the Wu-Tang curriculum, and so I am a real member of the Wu-Tang Clan. And now, not the mainland Chinese, but the Taiwanese through Grandmaster Yan Chao Liu, who's one of the 10 Tigers of Taiwan. So we were learning 6 Harmony, 7-Star, 8-Step Mantis. We were learning Tai Chi Chuan, Yang style, Chen style, and Wu style. We were learning Piqua Mizung, which is the labyrinth system, or the style popularized by Jet Li in the film Fearless. And also, that's the master who dies in Chinese Connection that Bruce Lee is mourning in the film. And so I'm studying that with them. And at that point, Sensei Leonardo had decided to open up the weapon legacies of Aikido, which is Aikiken and Aikijo, the legacies of Morei Ueshima. And you didn't have to be an Aikido student to study them. So every Saturday, I would go and train with him. So here I am. I'm going through all this while all this is going on, and I start competing in the tournament circuit. I compete in the AAU. I compete in Crane, Karate Referees Association, New England. And then I meet my old Kenpo instructor, the assistant instructor, Jim Gagnon from United Studios. So he's asking me what I'm up to. I'm telling him about all the different arts I'm studying, different things going on. He goes, "Well, why didn't you ever finish Kenpo?" I said, "There was nobody here to teach." And there were the aforementioned jock gentleman and a really cool friend of his who was like the epitome of, if you looked at the guy, his buddy, Steve Peeler, man, he was right out of, it looked like he was right out of Woodstock. He was a great guy. Mark Hippolito was the other gentleman. I was working with them for a little bit, but they were getting more involved in Shotokan, and I was just, for different reasons in my area, I was just never interested in Shotokan in my area. Just wasn't, you know. It was just different things, the people, the way they acted. I was just, no thanks. But I talked to him about Kenpo, and he was like, "Yeah, just like I'm teaching my basement," and I was like, "Oh, cool." So I started to train with him. So I'm training in 5 different martial arts all at the same time, and that's the way that's the way my mind works. It's different. It's like, people talk about tomato sauce. Well, you can put tomato sauce in pizza, or you can put it in General Tso's chicken. It doesn't taste the same. It's a different flavor. It's a different influence. So all this is going on. Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, I almost wonder if it's not necessarily photographic memory. You almost sound like you have an eidetic memory.
Yeah, well, recently I was talking to an expert in the field, and that's what he mentioned to me. He said, "You don't just have a photographic memory, Mr. Rebelo, you have photoeidetic memory."
Yeah, eidetic is the whole complete, cross-reference, encyclopedic, back and forth, but you can still keep them separate and functional separately. That's even more rare than photographic is.
Exactly, and that's what I found out, and that was fairly recently that I was made aware of that. But so in 1981, I got my first. I got my first just before advanced. We call it at the time a Nimu sash. So because you were learning the Chinese orientation, Taekwondo and Taekwondo, and shortly after that, in January 1983, I'm missing a very important point here. When I was training with Jim Gagnon, he was looking for a place. He was teaching his own place, and I was talking to Leo Lacerte, and I said, Leo, you should check out Kenpo, because I wasn't studying the hybrid system of Kung Fu, different things that happened. And I'm trying to explain, but we became fast friends, and I said, you really should check this out. I had a bad taste in his mouth. I don't know why. But then he got to meet Jim Gagnon. They were both Vietnam veterans. They had both been in Vietnam at the same time in the same area, and they started to talk to each other. They got along fantastically, and their friendship is what allowed Leo to change his mind and start studying Kenpo. So in January 1983, Leo Lacerte, another gentleman, Ron Valier, who later would go on to train with Joe Rossi and Kun Tao, and also with Nick Serio and his system, and myself, all tested for our black belts. Within 5 years, I had black belts in 5 martial arts. And I hadn't tested it for years because I had always been taught that by certain individuals that, it's the knowledge, not the rank. But I had the knowledge, so it was a lot easier to obtain the rank because I could perform the material. So all that was going on, and after Leo tested for his black belt in Kenpo, he wanted to continue his training. And, of course, being like myself, the big hog when it came to collecting martial arts books and magazines, etc., he always had every issue of black belt, every issue of Inside Kung Fu. Leo had it, and so did I. And so we decided, well, if we're talking about Kenpo, Ed Parker. And he contacted Mr. Parker. Now, at that time, which is 1980, the early 1980s, about 1982 and 83, Nick Serio, Kalai Griffin, Tony Andorin Cogliandro, Don Rodriguez had all gotten together to contact Mr. Parker because Professor Serio had been a member of the IKK back in late 1960s. And for whatever reason, he had left, so they decided to reestablish their ties with Mr. Parker. So we were getting in at the same time with this, so it was perfect timing. So they started to bring Mr. Parker in to teach a series of seminars. And Mr. Lacerte went to the first school meeting in I think it was 83 between 83 and 84. And there were there's still pictures of it in Inside Kung Fu magazine and Black Belt, etc. But at that time, Mr. Lacerte and I were learning from Big Red, the accumulative journal, as were many people in New England at that time. So we got in on the ground level right when Mr. Parker was just starting to teach in New England. So I was like a groupie. I would follow Mr. Parker at all these various seminars. I had old 1969 Dodge Dart, and I'd drive to different seminars and went through a series of old cars, but always looking for that instruction with Mr. Parker. And I started teaching at a local health spa, at a racquetball club, actually. And the owners were studying with me, and they were starting to study the Parker systems as I was transitioning out of the New England Kenpo-based orientation. I know Mike Burton somewhere is rolling his eyes about that because he hates when he uses that term. But it really was the system that was popularized, which was basically came from George Passari to Nick Serio to Fred Villari on down. That particular orientation and variation on Sonny Gascon's Karazempo Goshin Jitsu, which I also studied later on with Cedro Gascon and also became at one point the Massachusetts co-vice president, and I really wanted to help out with that. But back to Mr. Parker, I really wanted to learn. And the owners of the racquetball club said, "How come you never opened a commercial school?" I said, "Never had the capital." They went, "You do now."
Huh, okay.
And went to open the first commercial American Kenpo school actually I should say Mr. Lacerte opened one earlier, but it unfortunately wasn't a success and he closed it. But we opened one in the north end of the city and brought Mr. Lacerte in, and he in turn brought in this gentleman, Steve Arsenault, who I had known from years ago. We had gone to school together at one point, and he eventually ended up taking over the school and whatnot. I just kept teaching. I just kept going. But I kept following Mr. Parker around. And and I wanted to open up the first Ed Parker franchise. So I had a meeting with Mr. Parker and brought in the backers, and we got the prices and what we were going to do. And even though the backers backed out of not doing it as an Ed Parker franchise, Mr. Parker never forgot that. So I would follow him around to these various seminars, learning what I could. When the backers were backing me, I'd go to the major camps out in Pikesville, Maryland, out in Chicago, Illinois, the famous Chicago Conclave, the Lee Wedlake ran at Dragon Wind Kenpo, with Mr. Parker, Mr. Palazzo, Mr. Trejo, and Mr. Planis all there. And just wanted to learn. And we were at, Mr. Lusser and myself were at a distinct advantage because of a very important feature. We had both studied Kung Fu. And Mr. Parker's system is a very Chinese-oriented system of Kenpo and a different influence of who he had studied with, both northern and southern Kung Fu systems. And it was very obvious as we were going through it. Hey, this is Northern Praying Mantis Kung Fu. Hey, that's Hungar. Hey, that's Charlie Foot. Hey, as we're going through stuff. And so we were very fortunate. And I was very fortunate because Mr. Parker took a liking to me and liked to beat me up. So, and it's funny. Part of me sits there and says, did he do that because Tony Cogliano and Don Rodriguez said smack him around? Or did he do it because he liked me? Or did he do it because he knew I really wanted to learn? I don't care which reason it is. I got to work with Ed Parker. I got to have Mr. Parker demonstrate on me. In a world now where Ed Parker is just a picture on a wall that people bow to and this sainted figure, I got to work with Mr. Parker. I got to be smacked around by Mr. Parker. I got to be able to, and I took him at his word. He was like, if you have a question, don't hesitate to ask. I'd write stuff down. I'd show up in the next seminar. Hey, Mr. Parker, what about this? Hey, Parker, how'd you do this? And I would, pick his brain. Jeff Speakman tells a great story. One day he was taking a private lesson with Mr. Parker in his home. And this had to be about 1985, 1986, around that time. But I say 85. But anyway, I call up Mr. Parker, and I was talking with Leo Lusser, and we were discussing about the hand sword. And most people may sit to say, you called him up about a hand sword. The way Mr. Parker does the hand sword in American Kenpo is distinctly different from other styles of martial arts. And actually, if you look in Volume 3 of Infinite Insights, and you have Mr. Trejo doing the inward and outward parry, we do our hand sword the same way, directly on the center point of that triangle. So I called him up, and when I finally met Jeff after Mr. Parker died, and he said, "Oh, you were the guy with the hand sword." And he told me the story about how he called, and Mr. Parker kind of looked at the phone incredulously. And this happened several times when I dealt with Mr. Parker. I say, "Mr. Parker, how do you do a hand sword? Or how do you do it?" And kind of look at me. Sorry, Mr. Parker. Mr. Parker, how do you do a hand sword? Because when you hit me with this drop hand sword at the end of 5 swords, you just about knocked my contact lenses out of my eyeballs. Oh, you noticed that, huh? Oh, yeah. Or Mr. Parker, how do you do a heel palm? Mr. Parker, when you hit me, it felt like the back of my brain was going to blow out my cerebellum and was being compressed into my cervical vertebrae. Oh, you noticed that, huh? Oh, yeah. And it's funny. There's a thing that Ed Parker Jr. talks about. I call him Edmund, and I'm very blessed and very fortunate to have known him. He refers to that sometimes as my dad's sadistic fantasies. And I once told Edmund, I said, "Edmund, with all due respect, your dad's sadistic fantasies are my hopeful actualities."
Nice.
And whenever Mr. Parker did something particularly brutal, particularly violent, particularly vicious, I ate it up like ice cream. And you'd hear me go, "Yeah." And you look at me and go, "You like that stuff, don't you?" "Oh, yeah." It was like I always definitely referred to Kenpo as how to rip, gouge, maim, and mutilate for fun and profit. And in many ways, it's true. The phrase from The Perfect Weapon is very accurate. Kenpo can be the most lethal of the martial arts. And to me, that's the beauty of Kenpo, not the derogatory aspects of it. I see people today who literally won't tell people that they're teaching their children Kenpo because they consider it's like the black sheep of the family. I don't feel that way. I love the martial arts. And when I learned Mr. Parker's system, it was an eye-opening experience. It was a godsend. We were in New Bedford at a seminar that was being run as part of Mr. Tony Cogliandro. You got to give him props. He was the man who brought Mr. Parker here. He was the one who had Mr. Parker do the tours. He's the one who was the coordinator of Mr. Parker's itinerary. And, I just wrote off my time and just go train Mr. Parker. And that's how I considered it. And Mr. Parker would always take the extra time, because people said, well, you only went to a seminar. And they always want to downplay that. They always want to give a downtrodden image of my experiences with Mr. Parker. No one can take that away from me. No one can take away every time I dealt with Mr. Parker. No one was there for all those experiences. The naysayers who say negative things about it that I hear occasionally were not at the majority of those seminars, and I was. So when people say that, I'm like, I was busy learning. I was busy having him demonstrate on me. And that's how I learned. And as we learn the system, pick his brain and, go back and learn. And if you were doing something incorrect, he would correct you, or he wouldn't correct you. He'd make you think about it. Make you go through the thought process. Mm-hmm. And that's the way it was. So anyway, we're at the seminar at never forget Brian DeMello, who actually was a fellow student of mine way back when in '75, back at United Studios. And so he had a student, Justina Hall, who was one of the top competitors in the country at that time. And they brought Mr. Parker in for a seminar. And we had a couple of interesting incidents happen. And matter of fact, one of them is documented in Ed Parker's Ed Parker's signature uniform. He talks about this experience I have with Mr. Parker. And a person signing a book, thank you, Master Parker. Mr. Parker didn't look down on the guy in any way, shape, or form, but he just looked just the slightest bit uncomfortable. So I asked him, I said, Mr. Parker, why don't you like the term master? Well, Joseph, let me tell you. First of all, my only master is my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And second of all, Joseph, in order for there to be masters, there have to be slaves. And I don't want any of my students to ever feel that they're a slave to me. And that's verbatim. That's the joys of the photographic memory. So we were talking, and another important thing, we were talking about the black gi. And someone's mentioned about the black uniform. And I said, well, Mr. Parker, why did you go from the white gi to the black gi in your system? And he said, Joseph, let me ask you a question. What color do priests wear? I said, black. What color do judges wear with their robes? Black. What color originally did the police wear? Well, way back to Keystone Cops, black. It says in each instance, the color black has been associated with respect, sobriety, and an overall, and I think the term I'm trying to respect, sobriety, and
authority.
Authority. Thank you. And stereo were available, huh? So, and I never forgot that. And Edmund actually quoted that and put that when he was talking about the Ed Parker signature uniform. Those are the stories I remember. Those are the things, and whether it be techniques, sets, forms, or overall theories. When I watch certain videos, I can't help but laugh. Like there's a video floating around of Mr. Parker demonstrating the use of the knife, and he's working with a shorter gentleman, and it's at Joe Palazzo's studio. And there's a guy with short brown hair sitting at his feet, and he's talking, and you can see Mr. Parker looking at the guy, and the guy nodding in response. That's me.
Nice.
If you look at the Ed Parker Nunchaku seminar that a particular gentleman is selling on eBay, and there's this guy with curly hair and a big bushy mustache looking like Avery Shriver, that's me. And Mr. Parker breaks a pair of Nunchaku on my face at that seminar. He's got these foam rubber, which are mine. He takes a pair, and they have the hollow plastic on the inside, and he's doing his figure eight action, and whack, he drops into a rotating twist and blasts me with it. And he breaks it. And it's funny because at one point in the video, you see there's this little kid, and he's talking to Mr. Parker. and you can't hear what the little kid's saying, but the little kid's saying to him, Mr. Parker, you're hitting him really hard. And he goes, oh, no. And you can see him pointing in the track. He says, there's this thing in the track makes a real big noise when I hit him. Yeah, it was an nunchaku breaking on my face. But, those are the experiences.
I was just going to say, those are the stories that nothing can ever take those away. Those are memories you'll have for a lifetime.
Oh, you bet. And to pick Mr. Parker's brain and to talk about his system. And then, tragically after he passed, it was, I took him at his word. When he was alive, I said, who do I work with? And originally he sent me to Joe Palazzo. Now, originally we were working, and there's nothing against Mr. and Mrs. Cogliandro or anyone in New England at that point, but you have to understand a very important feature. We were all learning the same stuff at the same time. So it wasn't a matter where these individuals had all the knowledge and we went to them for all the knowledge. No, we were in the same boat all together learning at the same time. And as the various tests went on over the years from 1983 till his death in 1990, he was starting to be more and more adamant. He knew who were the people that really wanted to learn his system and the people who just basically wanted another stripe on their belt and would show up and they hadn't learned Mr. Parker's system and they were still doing the same material that they were doing 20 years before that. He was like, well, what am I here for then? If you don't want to learn what I'm doing. But people like myself and Mr. Lacerte and other people in our area, those we really wanted to learn, and he knew that. Mm-hmm. So he would pass that knowledge along, and it became critically important in regards to the system. And then after he died, I ended up working with everybody from Lee Wedlake to Hut Planis to Frank Trejo, anyone I could train with, anyone I could train who trained with Mr. Parker.
Have Guy will travel.
And just, you betcha. And it's like, I was the Kenpo groupie. I would show up anywhere. I just wanted to learn and get that confirmation of the fact. And that was the key. And so I was very blessed. And then, go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, so
you're it.
Not just with Mr. Parker's system, though, but you've got advanced black belts in multiple different lineages of Kenpo, and then a whole lot of other traditional systems as well. So since we're on the Kenpo topic for a moment, I got to ask, because I've seen, you have a few pictures up, just a few of the various uniforms that you have. Just a couple. And
at last count, 140. At last count, my collection is 147.
I rest my case. That's just a few, on the quantum scale, I guess.
Yep.
You're highly ranked in the Tracy system of Kenpo as well, which is it's diverged from an earlier interpretation of Ed Parker's system, and you've also been involved with the Goshin Jitsu people and numerous other ones, including David German. And David German was one of the original black belts under Ed Parker as well, and then he went and added more from other systems as well. So that's kind of the background to the question. The question being, as you're studying these different systems, and you're learning these different, same movement, but they call it this thing over here and they call it this thing over here.
Right.
How much similarity do you find versus how much different do you find when you're looking at these different interpretations?
Well, the phrase I use is we're more alike than we are different. And I want to correct something, first of all. In relationship to my training with the Tracys, I am a member of the Yudanshakai, which is a black belt society. When they recognized my eighth, and they recognized my 8th degree black belt from David German. I'm not going to be so bold to sit there and say I'm 8th degree black belt in Tracy Kenpo. However, I am a member of the black belt society, the Yudanshakai. I am one of the charter members of the Kenpo Hall of Fame, which was founded in 2007 by Al Tracy. With the exception of one time, unfortunately, I have been to all of the Gathering of Eagles and actually was hired later on by the Tracys to interview many of these different instructors from the Gathering of Eagles. I am in the process of learning the Tracy system, so that it's always been, Stephen, it's very important to me. It's always been important to me that there was a phrase that James Latose once said. He said, when I go into a Buddhist temple, I'm a Buddhist. When I go into a Catholic church, I'm a Catholic. When I go into a synagogue, I'm a Hebrew. When I go into a mosque, I'm a student of Islam. I've always wanted, it was always very important to me to have at least a working knowledge of these major martial arts systems, so that not only could I intelligently discuss it with practitioners of that art, I could perform their art.
Logical to me.
And many times to a black belt level. You know, I've heard for years, you know, and I understand how people are upset with the Tracys, like because of the stories that were written about the history of Kenpo and KenpoKarate.com and things from Jim Tracy and the others, and you know, and I understand that. And and when I first met Mr. Tracy, I met him. Actually, it was Bill, and you know, it's funny. Here's another one that has been popping up a lot. Count Dante. Man, lately I see more stuff about Count Dante on the internet than ever before. I knew Bill Aguiar, who was the rightful inheritor, and I'm saying that on a public medium, the rightful inheritor of Count Dante's legacy and the Black Dragon Fighting Society. I have autographed copies of Mr. Aguiar's updated version he did. I have the original. I was at the Roseland Ballroom in Taunton when Count Dante had the death matches there. I worked with Bill Aguiar, and it was funny because when I met him after Mr. Parker's death, and the words that got me in the door were Ed Parker, because I had been told by John McSweeney that after John Keane had left Robert Trias, by the way, not only the Midwest rep of the USKA, but the youngest fifth-degree black belt ever promoted by Robert Trias at that time. He then went to go train with Ed Parker. Mm-hmm. And he would fly from Chicago down to Pasadena, and he would take afternoon classes, and John McSweeney was in those same classes, and they studied with Ed Parker together. So when Kenpo people make fun of Count Dante, I can't help but laugh. I'm going, hi, remember that thing from Bloom County, we have met the enemy and they are us? You know, I hate to tell you guys, but what Count Dante's doing is Kenpo. And it's our system of Kenpo, too, on top of that. Because when he wasn't working with Mr. Parker, he was working with the Tracys and learning that material as well. And when I went to work with Bill Aguiar, the material he was teaching was Tracy Kenpo, when he wasn't teaching things directly from Dante. So it was like, surprise! But, you know, it was always very important to me to learn the system. So when I started working, I had a good friend of mine, John DeLuca, that I met through America Online. And we way back when, you were around at that point as well, with Kenpo cars and everything going on with the message boards and everything with AOL. Mm-hmm. And he was a Tracy guy. And he came down to my studio. We were having this Kathy's Espresso Bar. That's what she used to call this private chat room she had for martial arts on the Grandstand channel. And got to meet him and worked with him, and we're comparing notes between the Tracy and the Parker system. And then got to meet Mr. Tracy in Whitensville, Massachusetts. This guy, Rob Wager, owned a Tracy studio way out there. And I went to go meet Mr. Tracy. And, Mr. Tracy's attitude, because, when he found I was a Parker guy, even with the TV show, it was like suspect and prospect. And we were talking, and at one point he was talking about this one person, it wasn't me, who had upset him. And suddenly he dropped into did a thrusting sweep kick, dropped into a rotating twist and sandwich kick. I was like, look, there's Ed Parker. And he looked at me, and he didn't know, and for a moment he didn't know if I was insulting or complimenting. I said, sir, that is the ultimate compliment I can pay you. What is the greatest compliment? You move like your instructor. And he got this big smile on his face. And the ice was broken. And we ended up talking for like 8.5 hours. And we shot an interview, and he knew I didn't have an agenda. He knew I didn't have any preconceived notions about what was going on, or the phrase I coined on the internet, Ken politics. And he knew I didn't have that, and I just wanted to find out about him and get to know him. And they had the '99 event, and then, like I said, Mr. Aguiar was the one who told me about the seminar. So he was there. And in '99, went to the Gathering Eagles, phenomenal event. Phenomenal. If you didn't go, you should have. And then someone, I kept asking Mr. Tracy, got someone who's filming? Oh, yeah, I got somebody who's going to film. No, no, no. And he didn't. I don't know what happened, but it fell through. And it was a tragedy. It was a tragedy. So when the next one came up in 2001, John McSweeney, who knew me and was, of course, a Tracy Kenpo studio owner, was talking with Alan Pat Tracy. He says, well, why don't you get Joe Rebelo to do it? I mean, he did interview you. How'd you like it? Oh, he loved it. Great guy. We talked for hours, etc. Why don't you hire him? So he did. And there were so many people to interview. Another gentleman, John Nieto, at the event, was then brought into another room so he could interview people at the same time because there were just so many interviews. But the stuff that I have, and the saddest thing is John McSweeney, he's gone now. Ted Tabora, he's gone now. Urasaki, he's gone too. So many of the people I interviewed way back then, 17 years ago, are gone.
But at least now, you got to sit down and talk to them, so.
Oh, yeah, and have them not only talk to them, Steve, but have them demonstrate. So we do an interview, and then they do a demonstration of their art.
That's great.
Phenomenal stuff, incredible stuff. And have since then filmed several of the past gathering of Eagles since then, and different interviews and seminars with these various instructors. And it makes it all the more important. And, that's the key. If we don't document this history, if we don't retain it, if we don't put it out there for the masses to see, it dies with us.
Yeah, we're living in a great moment in time where we have all the technology to be able to do that too.
Right. But yet, here's the saddest thing, Steve. On at least 2 occasions, I have had instructors laying on their deathbed dying, looking at me, in one case in tears, saying, if only I had let you film more. And their own egos stopped them from letting me film. It's no, don't film that. No, don't film that. And here they were dying and realizing that piece of knowledge, that insight, is gone forever. They could never teach it again, and it could never be passed on for future generations because nobody recorded it.
I'm going to
flip that. And that's why I'm always, man.
I'm going to flip that positive. So for everything that has been filmed, where do people find it?
Again, well, one of the things that inspired me was creating a program. Again, talking with Mr. Parker. What happened was, here's the funny story, and a little bit of a sad ending too. I'm at McDonald's, and it's after a crane tournament. And I'm sitting at McDonald's, and I'm sitting with Ho Sung Pak and his brother Ho Young Pak and Richie Brandon. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment. Ho Sung Pak, Liu Kang from the video game Mortal Kombat 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
He and his brother Ho Young from WMAC Masters. Now, this is long before any of this. As Star Warrior, and I forget the Superstar. Richie Brandon, who later would go on to be Yin Yang Man on WMAC Masters. All 3 of these men have been inducted into the Black Belt Magazine and Inside Kung Fu Hall of Fame. And we're sitting there at McDonald's trying to figure out what the next tournament is. Okay? And I sat there and I thought to myself, man, if I took the time just to interview these guys and talk to them about their life and career. And later on I would with Richie. Well, unfortunately, and like I said, here's another part. Sadly, Richie died of pancreatic cancer a few years ago. You never know what life's going to deal you. So it became very important to me to take the time to interview these instructors, masters, celebrities in the martial arts, to talk to them about their career, not just the rudimentary stuff that someone in the news field and news media will walk into a job and have no idea what's going on. I would sit there and detail and research and memorize material. So when I interviewed these people, my greatest compliment I get from any of these interviewees is, how do you know that? Why do you know that? And that's how the program became. That's how the program started. And of course, Mr. Parker died in 1990, and Jeff Speakman was the first person I interviewed. I didn't tell him he was the first show, but but that's how the door opened. That's how it all started. And it's this October 3rd will be 28 years that our program's been on the air, and we're in 6 major cable systems, over 1 million households throughout southeastern Massachusetts. And we're now on YouTube, so you can watch past episodes and present extended episodes that are beyond the half-hour format exclusively on YouTube.
That's great.
So it's all about giving back. But you were talking about David German. I just wanted to, and I want to clarify that about the Tracy's, because I just didn't want people to sit there and say, well, he's claiming this. No, I'm saying what I've been recognized for, and if they do so and whatever they do, I'm learning the system. And that's the whole thing. I watched, Kevin Harshman. He just wrote a thing about how he changed his mind about the Tracy's and whatnot, which is fantastic. I said, I watched Tracy Kenpo. It's Ed Parker's Kenpo, and it's not Ed Parker's Kenpo. There are techniques in Mr. Parker's system we don't do in the Tracy's, and vice versa. Real funny Ed Parker story. We're at Tony Cogliandro School in Saugus, and he's talking about how he used to travel from jurisdiction to jurisdiction to teach law enforcement personnel. And he's at one place, and they got this enormous guy they're trying to put in a jail cell. And there's like 4 officers trying to push this guy into the cell. He's got his arms braced. And he says, so one of the officers says, Mr. Parker, can you help us with this guy? So he walks over and he says, so then Mr. Rebelo. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go. So he has to brace my hands against the door jambs of Tony Cogliandro's office and brace my feet. Brace hard. Now I don't see what happens. Suddenly I feel this foot kick me in the back of the knee. I feel these meat hooks. And this boy didn't have hands. He had meat hooks. That's Chuck Sullivan. He had meat hooks. Wrap and engulf my face, and suddenly all the light in the room is blotted out, and my head turns around like Linda Blair in The Exorcist, and I go spinning into the office. Wham! Boom! Wow, that was cool. Years later, I would work on Study of the Tracy system, and I would see a technique called the key. And the key was the technique that Ed Parker did to me. Now, here's a technique that Ed Parker no longer teaches, quote unquote, in the Ed Parker system, yet the Tracy's teach that technique. And I know Mr. Parker still remembered it because he did it on me.
Mm-hmm.
So the Ed Parker himself, the mind's like a parachute, works best when it's open. And my instructor, Aikido instructor, Jack Leonardo, he had a greater phrase. He said, Joseph, it's good to have an open mind, but it's better to have an open heart. By having that open heart, you accept everything. You embrace it all, and you want to just be sincere and learn. Ever the student. You mentioned about David German. I met David German. Matter of fact, I'm looking at the March 1981 issue of Black Belt magazine because I had it blown up into a poster. And in the January issue, Larry Tatum's on the cover, and that was one of the first articles I ever saw on David German. And I read about him, and I was fascinated with the way he thought. And then when he was in the March issue, it's got him and another gentleman, Kenny Carter, on the cover. And I always wanted to meet him. And he didn't have any commercial products out until later that year when he had filmed a series of instructional videos for Panther Productions. And one was the Kenpo Jiu-Jitsu Connection, explosive ground fighting, choking strangulation techniques, and the dynamic art of China. So I watched the videos, and after Mr. Parker died, I was asked by the Parker family to instruct at Mr. Parker's school for the West Coast IKK Instructors Camp. I had got to know a young lady through the internet who was interested in Kenpo, who lived out in Bakersfield, California. So one of the things I wanted to do, besides teach, I wanted to meet David German. So I contacted him, and he was kind of taken aback. He was kind of like,
"Who are you?
You want to work with me, huh?"
Yeah, who are you, and why are you contacting me?
Yeah, exactly. So I show up at his studio, and again, suspect and prospect. Now, before that, a gentleman that many people know in the Kenpo world, Ron Sanchez, who at one point was the head or very much involved in the LAPD SWAT team, and was also a Thai black belt from Jim Eliason, contacted me via online because I mentioned I'm going to go work with Mr. German and meet him and get to work with him. And he goes, "Joe, you better be careful." And I dead serious. I'm like, "Why?" He goes, "Joe, if David German didn't like you, if you were a black belt, walked into school, and you copped an attitude, he would choke you out and drag your unconscious body out in front of the mall where he used to teach and leave you there." And I'm like, "But Ron, I'm happy to see him. I really want to go meet him. I'm not going to be a jerk about it. Are you crazy? I'm really psyched about this. So I finally got to meet him, and I went out to a school in Covina, California, which was in a little strip mall right next to Trader Joe's, and I got to meet David German. And David German is and at one point, James Holzer, in 1985, in Inside Kung Fu magazine, dubbed him the eclectic heretic. He hated that term, but in a lot of ways, it was kind of right. And it was really funny because, when I finally got to meet him and, was talking to him, and he was like, I brought all the articles. I brought them all in a binder. He was like, you really wanted to meet? And he's kind of, now he's kind of, and I'm smiling. Now he's like, wow, you really, and I've never been to New England. And I said, I was like, I know, I'd have been there if you had been, I would have found out some way. So we started a friendship, and I started to learn Thai and started to learn David German's mindset and how David had trained with Mr. Parker and with Al Thomas in Budo Jiu-Jitsu. And they would brainstorm off each other. They would pick his brain because he was just a teenager back then. And he'd say, what Al Thomas teach you today? And he'd go, oh, good. And he'd either make a counter to it or incorporate it. Same thing with Al Thomas. What did Parker teach you today? If you ever watch The World of Martial Arts with Al Thomas, you'll watch, and at one point, you'll see Al Thomas do 5 swords. Well, he does 5 swords because David German taught it to him. And they would brainstorm off each other. So, and David German was a lot of people don't know this, but he opened up the first 2 Ed Parker franchises in Las Vegas back in 1961, the year I was born, by the way. And, he was a young teenager. And there's a really interesting story about David German over the year. One day we're talking about long form. Tino Tuilosega came up, founder of Lima Lama. He goes, yeah, I taught Tino Form 4. I was like, excuse me? I taught Tino Form 4. I got to hear this one. He was like, yeah, we're at Mr. Parker's studio. I'd learned the form, and Tino hadn't learned it yet. And so Mr. Parker said to me, teach Tino Form 4. I was like, that's just cool. That's just cool. Because, I just watched. Yeah, stuff like that. And, I got to train with the men who gave Ed Parker and Elvis. I got to train with the men who gave Elvis Presley and Wayne Newton their black belts. And, to work with Mr. Parker and Mr. German. And I worked with Mr. German because he really thought outside the box. He made me look at things differently. He'd make me look at techniques that were established Kenpo techniques and look at them in a different manner, in a different fashion. And we were doing short form 3, and he did it as an Aikido throw against a 2-hand wrist grab from the rear. We have techniques. If you do Mr. Parker's system, it's called destructive twins. If you do the Tracy system, it's called striking two-headed serpent. If you do Aikido, it's against Ushiro Katate Kotedori. And so he did it instead of punching a guy who's choking you in the front. It's a guy grabbing your wrist from behind, and you're dropping to a knee and throwing him. And then in midair, you're hitting him with the double block, with the inward block and outward block to the side of his head, and driving him away with a push in midair with the poke that you originally did to the guy in front of you in the eye. And I'm going, wow, never even contemplated that. And that's the joy of working with David German, and the way he thought and the way he would infuse. And I'll say straight out, no one, quote unquote, no one I have ever met does a smooth transition from Kenpo into the jiu-jitsu and grappling arts as David German. Nobody. And that's not an aspersion against those individuals who have incorporated Brazilian jiu-jitsu into their Kenpo and whatnot, and that's all cool. But no, I haven't seen anybody do it to the level of David German. Nobody. And that's what makes it great. That's what makes Thai Thai. Mm-hmm. It's Ed Parker's Kenpo. It's Budo Jiu-Jitsu. It's White Tiger Kung Fu. They learned from Wei Feng Du or Du Wei through people like Parker Linnegan and Brian Adams and getting history from these men and learning how their thought processes work. But it runs the gamut. I mean, from Mr. Parker's system to David German's system to Sonny Gascon's Kata Zenpo Goshin Jitsu, which is the mother art for what we know as the New England-based system of Kenpo or Shaolin Kenpo with an M from Fred Villari, if you're doing 1 through 5, 1 through 6 kata, or 1 through 6 Chinese form, or whatever you want to call it in your particular discipline from that orientation, you're doing Kara Zenpo Goshin Jitsu. If you're doing numbered combinations, you're doing Kata Zenpo Goshin Jitsu. They may not be in the same numerical numbering system, but it's Sonny Gascon's art. And to have met with him and had the honor and privilege of working with him and being recognized by him meant the world to me. And it runs the gamut. I mean, I'm always learning. I'm working on Shikichi Odo's Okinawan Kenpo and working on that. And I studied Okinawan Kenpo through Carlos Febres, through Nindo-Ru, the Nindo-Ru organization, as well as Kobujitsu. The Wu-Tang curriculum. I still do Mantis and Kung Fu and Tai Chi. And I'm a weapons fanatic. I teach 65 different weapons. Someone asked me the other day, how do you do all this stuff? I said, simple. I have a 162 IQ, photographic memory, and I don't have a life.
Oh, your life is martial arts.
Darn skippy. And most people don't believe that. There's a great story of Rich Hale. When Rich Hale finally got to meet me and come down here, and he's like going, I had a box of belts, a box of different ranks of black belts, and he goes, Joe, out of curiosity, yeah? You wearing all these? Yeah. Really? Yeah. I just blew. Can I take a picture? It's like, yeah. I went, wait. Dude, why do you want to take a picture of my body? I just can't get over. It was like I can't fathom that. I can't get around that, get my head around that. That's just, I go. I've learned one phrase to say over the many years. Like I said, it'll be 50 years into martial arts this October. I'm the exception, not the rule. And that's the key. I'm not the average person. Ed Parker wasn't. David German wasn't. They weren't Al Tracy wasn't. They weren't the average people. If they were, the classic phrase from Huck Plannis, guy walks into his office and says, Ms. Plannis, how long does it take the average person to become a black belt? The average person doesn't become a black belt.
That's right.
Average is settling for mediocrity. I definitely have never settled for mediocrity. And there are people who don't believe I do what I do, and people don't believe, and that's why I do, as you know, all my videos on YouTube. And when someone asks a question on a Facebook message board, I put it out there, and I respond to it. And some people sometimes say, "Well, you didn't respond to the question, but boy, it was a great video." It's like, okay.
Yeah,
but
there's so many naysayers out there, though, and you know what? I don't care. I don't have time for them anyways. This ain't for you.
Well, you know what? I always say, when you get stuff like that happening, the coolest part of it all is you get to do the two things you can't do during sex. Point and laugh. And somebody out there is going, boy, ain't that the truth. But yeah, that's what I do. I mean, and if you watch my videos, anyone who watches my videos, for the listeners on our podcast who may not be familiar with me, I'm a frustrated stand-up comedian. I'm always cracking jokes. I'm always having fun in my videos. I'm always passing along information that people may or may not know. And I can make occasional mistakes. I'm only human. Oh, well. And if someone brings out a mistake to my approach, I go, okay, I'll make a new video. Whoop, there you go, addressing it, talking about it. I sit there and say, I'm only so many billion heartbeats, and then I'm worm food.
So you may
How
as
much
well have
time
fun.
do I have left, Steve? Mr. Parker died at 59. David German died at 65. And when I go down the laundry list of different systems, buckling pie Kenpo, I worked on that with Grandmaster Bill Gregory, who's one of the 3 people ever promoted to the rank of 7th degree or 7th level black sash under Daniel Pye. You work with these different individuals, and he died at 70 in cancer. We see people look at Bob White and the struggles he's going through with cancer. Look at the struggles that Frank Trejo's going through with diabetes. We're human. How long we got? I'm 56 years old. I'll be 57 in October. I don't know how much time I got left. So it's all the more reason that I want to teach people and pass that knowledge along. Somebody asked me a while the other day they asked me, what's it take to be a grandmaster? I looked at them and said, your instructors die. it really took him aback. He was really shocked by that, but it was true. You know, I mean, you never think you're going to be the master. You never think you're going to be a grandmaster. You never think you're going to be wearing that many stripes on your belt or different. You know, and I love people, you know, those big thing on the internet is the rank thing. And I go, dude, look, with all due respect, I'm not waving my belt like my penis saying put another stripe on this like a condom. And maybe a little blue for some people, but, you know, it's not about that. You know, and Al Tracy had a great phrase for me. He sat there and said, Joseph, do you know what it takes to be a master? I said, I gave a couple of, you know, different, and he says, Joseph, you know you're a master when the masters invite you to the table.
I love that.
And they're only going to, and the last part was, and they're only going to invite you once. Well, you know, I've lucked out, Steve. They've done it a few times now, you know, because I'm not looking for it. I'm not running around saying, oh, will you please put me, would you? No, I'm just, you know, I'm just busy being me. You know, the phrase from Gene Kelly, don't you ever get, you know, Mr. Hahn, do you ever worry about being defeated? Nah, man. Well, why not? I'm too busy looking good. You know, I'm just too busy learning. So for me, that's what mine is. I'm too busy learning. I'm too busy growing. And, you know, and also I'm too busy recognizing the people who have got new ideas and new ways of thinking about Kenpo and different martial arts and saying, hey, what you do is cool. And when they say, wow, man, someone like you saying that, I'm like, just me. You know, but I'm saying what you do has merit. When I work and I'm looking at when I look at people and, you know, Professor Kimo Ferreira and the Kenpo Jitsu Kai and, you know, testing in front of him and knowing him since 2000 and watching, you know, he's a direct student of Walter Godin. You know, I look at George Elmer with Chinese American Kenpo, and a lot of people like him or not like him or whatever. You know, we all have haters. But, you know, I like the way he moves and certain things things he does in his system. If I didn't, he wouldn't have made me his technical advisor. I enjoy what he does. You know, I look at people, you know, I look at pictures of Professor Chow and having worked with Bill Massarelli and, you know, found out about the Kashi system of Kenpo. The other person who went to train with Professor Chow with Nick Serio. You know, and just different people. I said Carlos Cervez from Nindo-Ryu and learning, you know, Japanese and Okinawan martial arts from him and his orientation and his organization. You know, I'm lucky. I'm just lucky and very fortunate and very blessed. And I just want to share the wealth, man. That's what it's all about. That's the bottom line. You know, the big phrase is, how can I help you? That's the best customer service. That's the key.
The same philosophy that drove the creation of this podcast.
There you go.
Yeah, let's bring people's positivity to the world.
There you go. Like I said, you know, I mean, Ed Parker told me a great phrase. Joseph, let a smile and a handshake become your best friends. And you know, I think about Mr. Parker, and you know, Ed Parker was a genuinely nice person. He was just a wonderful human being. And you know, all these different instructors that I got to meet with, and train with, and study with, I sit there and I say, you know, I'm so blessed, I'm so fortunate. You know, I always say, you know, some of the deadliest people that I ever worked with on the planet were also some of the nicest. And if we can follow that, you know, we'll finish real quick. I'm looking at the time. Chuck Sullivan. First time I ever met Chuck Sullivan, I was at Ed Parker Jr.'s house in Pasadena. And his, I've got a meeting. I've got to let you go. I mean, you know, you can say it. I said, where are you going? Well, I've got to go meet with Chuck Sullivan and Vic LaRue. Oh, I've never met him. Can I go? I was like, yeah, sure. Come on. So I get there, and they're both sitting down with Frank Trejo. And they're sitting in front of a little monitor, and they're watching footage from Mr. Parker's tour of Chile that he did with Mr. Trejo, and he also did with Eric Lee and Tadashi Yamashita in Chile. So what's great is they're having Frank do a narration of the footage, and that thing's got to see the light of day someday. Really, I mean, now, you know, I mean, many years later, but I'm really hoping and praying that someday they release that in some way, shape, or form.
I'm making a note to ask about that.
Yep. So anyway, we sit down afterwards, and I said, look, I've got my camera equipment with me. Can I record interviews with you two gentlemen? So we did one with Vic, and then we did one with Chuck. And it worked out great because it had the blue background. It had that blue background that they used to have with the picture of Mr. Parker and the picture of Elvis and that at Vic's house. So we do the interviews, and then afterwards, Chuck walks up to Edmund, and I go, he was I was in the bathroom, whatever. He goes, "It's Edmund. Who is this guy?" And again, the classic phrase is, "How does he know so much about me? Why does he know so much about me?" And he told me the story. I just roared, man. Yeah, and that's been so many times. For those listeners who enjoy this podcast, go back on talkradio.com, and I hope if you don't mind me giving a selfish plug.
Plug it. Go ahead.
I also work for Alan Goldberg, who runs the Action Martial Arts Mega Weekend. At one point, he had a podcast with Luis Velasquez called the Action Martial Arts Magazine Power Hour, and real funny story where he had Martin Kove, Kreese from the Karate Kid, on as a guest. So I had a question because I had interviewed Pat Johnson, and Pat Johnson told this great story about how he had trained the various actors for the Karate Kid film, and how he had trained Pat Morita and Ralph Macchio together so they would build out that camaraderie with one another. He trained all the kids from the Cobra Kai together so they would build up their camaraderie and relationship, their role in the films. He taught Martin Kove separately, individually, by himself. And the first time he had him meet the actors that were portraying the kids in the Cobra Kai, he had him walk in a black gi and a black belt. So they already associated him with being a black belt. They didn't know that he really wasn't, but they already associated him with that authority figure and the respect that they had. And, Chad McQueen and Billy Zabka, they were already lifelong martial arts since they were kids. So they were already martial artists. It was a great story, and I really liked it, so I wanted to ask him about the story. So I call up the show, and Luis Vasquez doesn't know who I am from a hole in the wall, and nor should he at that time. So he says, we've got this guy from New Bedford, Joe Rebelo, and now I had interviewed Alan Goldberg 13 years before that at the Ocean State Grand National Karate Championships. And I had mentioned how he was associated with the original Guardian Angels before they were Guardian Angels with Jason Lau. I also mentioned how he was on a particular show, and it was the Montel Williams show out in New York, and how he had confronted a particular instructor that was doing a women's self-defense seminar and questioned his credentials as an instructor of women's self-defense. He didn't challenge the guy to a fight, but that was still unheard of at the time. And he looked at me, he was like, "You remember that? How did you see that? WPIX, man, we get that in my area. You saw that?" And so we get to the show, and suddenly Alan Goldberg says, "The one thing you never say in a podcast or any form of media, stop the show." And I'm sure Lewis must have had a brain aneurysm when he said that. And then he says, "Look, Myron, I want to tell you about this guy." And he regaled him with the story and how we had met. He said, "This guy's going to know stuff about you that nobody's going to know. He's going to remember things, and it's going to." So I'm thinking, "Gee, thanks, Al. No pressure." So I asked him the story, and of course, Martin gave a wonderful dissertation about it and wonderful stories about it. It was great. So after the show's done, I get a personal message on Facebook. "Blip, want a job?"
Nice.
So I became the co-host. And at least on half a dozen occasions in my tenure as the co-host, Alan Goldberg, after the show, would have those guests call him back again after the show and go, "Who is this guy?" And the shows have been great. And if you get a chance to, ladies and gentlemen who are listening, please check out some of the episodes. Tayari Cassel's a great show, but just check it out. But again, I want to thank you. I want to thank you, Steve, for starting this program up. I want to thank you for starting this podcast up. I want to thank you for wanting to educate the general public and the martial arts public and the Kenpo public specifically. But, we need more of this. We need more documentation of the history. We need more documentation of these different individuals, because every time one of them passed, there was a African phrase I heard once of respect your elders and listen to every story, for when they die, a library has burned to the ground. And it was like, wow. I think of all the Ed Parker stories, David German. And now think of all the Chuck Sullivan stories. And that's why Dinner with Chuck is such a great thing. We talk about Dominic. Dominic is normal, can be Dominic during those shows. But he has given me recently the greatest compliments about my career and what I do, and I'm honored and privileged to be thought of that way. And it was very important to me that when I got to work with Chuck Sullivan recently in Rhode Island, thank God for Dave Gigliotti, but simply stated, to be able to show that man that I knew his art, and that I could perform all 55 techniques, and that I knew the master form. And now, when I looked at him afterwards, I said, well, Chuck, do I know your material? And he looked at me. You know how Chuck, he looks down and he just shakes his head. He's like, yeah, Joe, you do. And he just,
Chuck's a wonderful
and he was
guy.
like, and I, yeah, he is. And he just said, and basically just said to me, just send in the video, man. Yeah, I know you do it. You know? And, you know, I really have to thank Mr. Gigliotti for that, and getting to meet so many of the senior council of the IKCA, and let them know, and that way they could know, okay, you know what, Kenpo Joe is Kenpo Joe, you know, and you know, I'm not sitting there and just giving lip service to it, but I can perform that material, and I can cross-reference Ed Parker's Kenpo and other arts and transfer and say, you know, it's just the way my mind works. And it was funny because actually at a couple of points he was mentioned technique. I went, no, Chuck, that's the Parker version of it. And we were talking about, he goes, yeah, you're right. And I'm going, told you I knew it. You know, told you I took the time. And just wanted to show them and prove to them and let them know. And I really, my goal really was to test in front of him. I really wanted to do that, but it just wasn't possible, sad to say. But at least he knows, and they know. And you know, everybody on down that sit at that table at dinner with Chuck knows, because they've seen me do the techniques and do freeform with it and improv. And, you know, let's rock, baby. You know, I'm here to hit people, and I'm here to hit people hit me. Let's go.
So you're going to send in that video?
Greetings. I'm going to probably do it later on this year. I'm just trying to get stuff done. I mean, you know, with Mr. Tracy passing away, I'm got to make arrangements to go to the event. You know, actually, honestly, truth be told, I didn't know how much it was. You know, I didn't have, you know, if I had known in advance more with the cost of it, I'd have done it, but I'm going to do the video. Yeah. It'll be, and it's funny because I think some people, when they heard, well, it's going to be black belt number 20. And I think some people just thought I was just trying to get a belt just to get a belt. No, man, I don't do that. If I test, I can do it because I could do the material. I could do the format, and I can go over it on a black belt level. And that's the key. And it's funny because originally the bylaws, it's the last thing we'll finish with, I know at the time. In the bylaws originally, there was a listing that if you were a first-generation black belt, but if you had tested through the IKK for black belt in front of Ed Parker, and I did it with my second, 1989, and you could perform the master form, you could test for your black belt through the IKCA. And I mentioned that on a dinner with Chuck, and he was like, wow, them people ask about that before in a long time. Yeah, I guess so. And, but I wanted to be able to show him personally, to be able to say, you asked Chuck Sullivan, hey, Joe know our material? Yeah, he did it right in front of me. You know,
the good news is if you send it in, he'll grade it anyway. So,
right, exactly. But it meant so much more that I could perform it in front of him.
Yep.
That it was right there. You know, Ed Parker says, "To hear is to doubt, to see is to be deceived, to feel is to believe." You know, I want people to know. I want people to believe because they see me doing it, and they put in it, and like the videos and everything else. It's real tough to say I don't know it when I perform it. It's real tough to say, oh, I don't know that system when I can perform it and do videos on it and detail it out on an expert level. It's a little difficult to say, well, he doesn't know it. Well, how did he put up the video? You know, look at it. It's accurate. It's correct. It's right. You know, and he's giving us information I didn't even know about. That's what makes it all worthwhile. So the great man once said, Steve, I talk too much. I never shut up. So...
No, this has been a great discussion with you, man. I really appreciate being on here again, and I'm sorry we had to come back for the technical difficulties piece, but you know it's been another great conversation. So,
and honestly, you got more stuff about Mr. Parker this time around and different things, so you know that's the beauty of it.
Works for me. So, knowing that our listening audience, at the time we are recording this, which is January of 2018, we have aired 6 episodes so far. This one's probably going to come out in middle to late February, but we have hit 20 countries with 6 episodes. I am blown away by how fast this thing has gone around the world. So knowing now that we have a worldwide audience, Joe, what words of wisdom would you like to send out to everybody out there listening on, you know, perseverance or sticking with what your goals are and all that kind of stuff? what's been the biggest keys that you can share for everybody?
Okay, I'm going to preface this with a short story only because of what you just said. I was at the International Karate Championships in 2009. Two gentlemen, Dmitry, I believe, and Petrov, who trained with Professor Raffaello in Russia, approached me, and they salute me. Kenpo Joe, how are you, sir? We watch you on YouTube. Oh, you watch it out of your home? No, we watch it at school. So I'm thinking, oh, okay, you go to high school or college and you watch it on the terminal stage. No. Okay, so now I'm confused. And they informed me that their instructor, Professor Raffaello, who has a YouTube channel, by the way, has a 60-inch TV in his studio in St. Petersburg, and he has it attached to the internet. And they pull up my videos on YouTube, and they have Petrov or Dmitry translate it into Russian for topics under class.
That's
and
great.
That blew me away. That people all over, and I got similar stories from people in South America, that the internationals and all this, and I'm like going, who thought? You never know, and again, like this podcast, you never know who you're going to influence. You never know who's going to listen to it. You never know who's going to enjoy it and appreciate it, and that's the beauty of the art. So, if you folks want to contact me, I am Joe Rebelo. A lot of people know me as Kenpo Joe. My studio is Rebelo's Kenpo Karate. You can check us out on Facebook and Rebelo's Kenpo Karate, or myself, Joseph Rebelo, Rebelo. I'm a rebel and an O. On the L's, it's one, not two, but one. I'm 2 Porter for 2 L's. We also are going to reactivate the website, which will be KenpoJoe.com. That'll happen shortly. Again, you can also check us out on YouTube. On YouTube, I'm listed as Kenpo Joe 1, number 1. On YouTube, we have over 130 videos right now. Check out Martial Arts Today TV, as well as Rebelo's Kenpo Karate television program on YouTube. And you can also check us out through the City of New Bedford's website and the New Bedford Cable Network website, seeing us live on streaming video. But again, YouTube's got extra footage exclusive to YouTube, so check that out. And that being said, there we go. And as I always say, greetings from the land of beatings.
Thank you very much for being on the show, Joe. This has been a blast.
Thank you. Oh, by the way, KenpoJoe at AOL.com. Got to throw in an email, KenpoJoe at AOL.com.
There you go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's done for this episode. Had a great time talking to you, Joe. Appreciate it. We'll probably have you back again at some point.
Fantastic. Great to hear it. And thank you very much for the time.
Have a good one.
Be good. Keep training.
Likewise. Talk to you later.
You bet. Be good. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
That was a great chat with Joe. Again, I'm thankful he's such a great person and was willing to get back online with me and re-record this one, since we had technical difficulties the first time around. It was great stories of New England martial arts and his career spanning the last 4 decades. Actually, almost 5. He's a walking encyclopedia of martial arts, folks. Look him up on Facebook, or if you're in the area, drop him a line. You'll enjoy the experience, I promise. Lucky episode 13 up next week. Master Alejandro Mora of the Salinas Taekwondo Academy. I met him in 1999, and we've been friends ever since. He's been the owner and the head instructor of the Salinas Taekwondo Academy since 1998, and he's one of the most positive people I've ever met. I got to hear about how he got his start in his hometown in Mexico, and how he wound up getting to compete in national competitions, working with Olympic-class competitors, and his favorite parts of teaching. He's truly a wonderful human being, and I'm proud to call him a brother, a mentor, and a teacher. Tune in next week for episode number 13. Find us at artistofmotion.com, artistofmotion.com/iTunes. Cheap plug, leave us a rating and a comment or two. artistofmotion.com/Google Play. Again, leave us a rating and a comment or two. Our Facebook page, Artist of Motion. You can email pod@artistofmotion.com. And that's all for this week. I'm Steve Zalazowski. Catch you next time on the Artist of Motion podcast.